Okay, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll make a start. Thanks for taking some time out your busy days to join our webinar today. So my name's Andy Tatlock. I'm the sales director over at Tivity, and today we'll just be running through a short webinar followed by some questions around the subject of unlocking social housing IT resource to focus on tenant value. Just a bit about the agenda today and what we plan to cover. So who are Tivity, a little bit about Tivity as an organisation, what we do, and specifically how we're helping solve some of the challenges we currently see within our customers in social housing. A bit about how we can use software and the role that has in alleviating some of the day-to-day mundane tasks of network and supplier management, how this can in turn help create capacity within the IT function to focus on the projects and activity that is better suited to creating tenant value. And then lastly, how connectivity as a service is helping Housing Trust through its OPEX subscription service and the agility that can deliver, particularly potentially in uncertain times. So just a little bit about who we are. So we are bringing the as a service model to the network industry. So essentially what Tivity do is provide a consolidated WAN, LAN and Wi-Fi solution, so complete user through to internet infrastructure, but we deliver that on a flexible pay-per-user subscription model akin to a cloud or utility type consumption model. We then overlay our own self-service software on top of that, which delivers enhanced management and monitoring capabilities, which really takes away some of the day-to-day tasks and workload of internal IT. And we've got about 20 years as part of our group organisation, about 20 years expertise in delivering LAN, Wi-Fi and WAN networks. So why are we here today? So we believe Tivity is activity that there is a real, what we would refer to as a paradigm shift within technology and infrastructure at the moment. So if you look at historically more legacy on-site services and infrastructure, we've seen this across infrastructure servers, we've seen this across software, that there is a move towards an as a service model, and that technology is very much as a product and as a service is very much changing, but also in terms of the behaviours and the consumption of that really needs to move. And if you think about other areas of IT and technology over time, we've seen within servers and on-site infrastructure a move to we've seen a move to on-premise through to CSPs and clouds like the likes of AWS and Azure. We've seen with software that has transitioned to SaaS with the likes of ServiceNow and Salesforce, but very much there's been very little innovation within the connectivity and infrastructure space, and we'll dive into that in a bit more detail, which kind of talks around more the legacy way of procuring, managing and delivering these services. Tivity are turning that on its head with the real as a service model, but within the traditional networking and connectivity space. And just a little quote here that kind of helps set the scene on this before we dive into some of the social housing technology specifics. This is a famous quote that making your own electricity won't make your beer taste better. And ultimately what that is saying, it is taken from actually 19th century brewers. So back then the national grid wasn't as stable as it would have been, and essentially these brewers used to make their own electricity. And what they found was over time that the brewers who had not adopted what then became the more stable national grid fell behind their competitors, because essentially as an organisation they were spending too much internal time and resource on what is essentially a commoditized or utility service. So this principle was actually, and this quote was used in the launch of AWS by Jeff Bezos, and essentially the premise is, why spend valuable IT resource in general, but from a technology perspective, why spend IT resource on time on ultimately internal services that are not going to make your end user experience better or your beer taste better in this analogy. And that really resonates within what we're going to talk to you guys today about. which is around how you can free up the resource within your housing IT to ultimately spend time and efforts on improving the end user tenant experience and not wasting that, if that's the right word, on keeping the lights on around kind of corporate networking. So what are the challenges that we see today within social housing? So all ones that you will be very familiar with, just to call out some of the more recent ones: decarbonisation, digital inclusion, housing supply, funding, and changing workplaces. And all of these areas have to be considered and thought about when a social housing organisation is working through their digital transformation strategy. And all of these can be solved and helped, again, through the planning of digital transformation and how that works. And when we talk about digital transformation, what do we say that actually means? So it's a collective. Obviously, it's the techno stack that you used to get to underpin the benefits and realise improvements within the areas that we just spoke about. It's the suppliers and the vendors that you choose to work with. What is that partner ecosystem? How do they work with you? How much do they step into your business to support? What's the contractual terms? What's the SLAs? All of those things. Obviously, IT focus. So, internal IT resource, whether that be skills, personnel. What does that look like in terms of really underpinning and then playing through the delivery of that digital transformation? And then total cost of ownership. So not only do you need to consider the cost of the compartmental parts of infrastructure or tech stack or suppliers, it's how all of this comes together as a whole and what is the cost on your business. And these are the things that are really going to resonate as we start to dive into some of the agenda points we talked around a little bit earlier. And I think the real focus of this will be around IT resource, but then also the kind of networking and connectivity element and how this can fit into the digital transformation strategy. Okay, so let's just look at how this currently works today. So if we were to look at your more traditional approach to network management and even managed services within housing, you can see here from end user, so corporate staff on site, all the way through to internet application. You can see there is traditionally a multi-vendor, multi-siloed tech stack of infrastructure that underpins that internet access capability. So you can see here, you may have your WAN and security delivered by one provider, traditionally 3-year, 5-year contracts, professional services, upfront project management, CapEx costs. You will also then see you could then procure your Wi-Fi particular vendor from one supplier. Again, that could be a capital investment from your organization, buying the kit and managing that over a period of time. You then may procure that from another supplier for the LAN. And before you know it, that whole tech stack becomes really convoluted and overly complex for what is really a commoditized service in just allowing your corporate users, as I said, to access the internet or application. And let's just dive into what, I guess, some of the challenges that type of scenario can cause on internal IT resource. So, it's never ending. Obviously, when you're managing multiple vendors, multiple different types of kit, your staff may need training. There are, resourcing issues that you need to consider. There's leave you need to consider. The network constantly needs internal network management support. BAU activity, adds, moves, changes can all start to compound, particularly across a relatively large estate, as often is the case in social housing. You need to use valuable IT resource. We used the phrase before, just to keep the lights on. As we've mentioned several times already, internet connectivity and networking is becoming increasingly commoditized, and therefore, why should it be so difficult, and why should there be such a mishmash of suppliers to ultimately underpin what is just internet access? I think as the industry starts to become more commoditized, one thing that traditionally you see is, especially working with a number of different vendors who don't have perhaps visibility of the entire end-to-end journey, is often services can be overspec'd and lack transparency. And as I said, traditionally, and if you look at the way it works in the market at the moment, we know that internet connectivity is becoming more commoditized. That can drive prices down, and therefore vendors, MSPs, suppliers potentially need to either margin stack or sell, over-spec'd infrastructure and kits just to maintain a relevance and ultimately profit margins. And if you then kind of extrapolate that across 4 or 5 siloed areas, that situation can really then start to compound. Hidden costs and restrictive long-term contracts. This is a big one we mentioned before around potentially 3 to 5 year contracts within one. Should you need to cancel a site, you've got to pay the remainder of the term. Should you need to move, that often becomes quite difficult and prohibitive. Also, we see within, particularly with MSPs, a certain day-to-day management elements that can be additional charges. There's a really convoluted pricing structure, but also one that lacks a lot of transparency. And again, managing multiple vendors, contracts and hardware cycles can only further put pressure on internal IT resource in terms of managing those things day to day. Okay, so how is Tivity overcoming that? And then we'll dive into what that means from a social housing perspective. So as you can see here, essentially Tivity is delivering that one-stop shop from end user on site through to internet and application. So every element of that tech stack required to deliver the service is delivered by one supplier. We've then got the Tivity software, the self-service platform, which we'll dive into, which kind of really adds the benefit of the day-to-day management. But essentially what you have is one supplier providing that entire infrastructure on a per user per month subscription service. So, alleviates a lot of the multi-touch point requirements that's perhaps had or you may have within the multi-vendor setup, but also then delivered on a really innovative commercial model that provides you with some flexibility. And we can come on to the benefits of that. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of, we just touched upon some of the benefits, but just to dive a little bit deeper into that. So, the premise within Tivity is that we ideally want to try and remove the people dependency on both sides of the fence. So obviously, how can we allow and deliver software as part of your traditional WAN, LAN and Wi-Fi services that gives you as a customer or a social housing trust, gives you the benefit of automation, not necessarily needing less people, but allows you to utilize the people that you've got on the services that are better suited to your digital transformation strategy. Obviously, from a software perspective, Tivity works 24/7, 365 days a year. There is software that ultimately is managing the service on your behalf. And of course, there are people and engineering resource that sits behind that. But a lot of the 60 to 70% of the day-to-day network management is alleviated through the software. Again, that gives time back into the IT team, and we'll dive into a case study in a moment that just kind of gives us and can give a bit more context to that. It allows you to standardize. So, what we see traditionally within networking infrastructure when we talked about the multi-silo, multi-vendor approach is obviously that you get over time with different people making different decisions, sites closing, new sites opening, you can start to really compound the challenges around different types of vendors, different types of infrastructure, all kind of knitted together, which can provide a management overhead in itself. With Tivity and connectivity as a service, you get a really standard Wi-Fi, LAN and WAN deployment across whether it's one site or 100 sites. There's a real, as is probably prevalent within your organizations, there is a real skill shortage at the moment, and this is no more so than in IT, particularly in networking and connectivity. With the Tivity solution, it removes the dependency or decreases the dependency on having internal skills within that space. And then we talked about the OPEX price per user model, which provides a really predictable and scalable commercial model for your organization moving forward. And, in principle and in practice, the whole solution is delivered on a price per user per month. If you were to scale that up, it's a really simple scaling model. And similarly, if you were to scale that down through site closures or changes within your organizational strategy, it means you're not being held back or hindered by legacy contracts from different vendors. Okay, so I just wanted to dive into a bit of a case study so you can just give you kind of some context as everything we've just talked about, but specifically how Tivity has worked with an organisation to alleviate some of their challenges and concerns. So this is with an organisation called Irwell Valley Homes based in the Northwest. So, 20,000 customers across just shy of 8,000 homes. So Tivity started working with Irwell Valley across a number of different challenges they had. So just to kind of give you a headline overview of those, they had what is not uncommon, a traditional, quite a small IT team within the organisation for what was quite a dispersed corporate network. So they had 19 what they would call office locations, obviously many more tenant homes, but 19 office locations where they essentially needed corporate access. So what that meant for them previously was obviously there was your traditional WAN, LAN and Wi-Fi deployments across those locations. However, that was delivered over, again, not uncommon, multiple suppliers, multiple different types of technology, and that kind of multi-vendor setup created an overhead within the IT team. And what that meant is that they actually found themselves firefighting, is their terminology, and being distracted from the IT and digital transformation projects that were actually going to add value to their tenants. So things like cloud migration, and in particular app development for their internal use, but also tenant use, all aimed at improving the end user experience. But IT felt like they couldn't deliver on those things because they were just spending a lot of time managing essentially the network, and also a relatively limited capex budget, which meant any kind of refresh or upfront investment was proving particularly difficult. In terms of the solution, so what Tivity were able to do was essentially, as part of the connectivity service, we provided full site survey and audit of every site. We can do that from a software perspective and also physical site surveys. That then meant we would deploy a complete WAN, LAN, security and Wi-Fi refresh across all 19 sites, access to Tivity management software, and all of that is delivered without a single penny of capital expenditure. So no buying the kit, no professional services, no project management upfront costs. All of this was delivered on a monthly ongoing price per user service, which really allowed them to give them flexibility to obviously, number one, overcome the any upfront layout challenges, but also really gave them that flexible pricing model moving forward. The service is delivered on a subscription service, which allows them to do what they need to do. If they need to close a site, they can do that really simply without financial penalty. Similarly, if they need to scale up or down. And also, as part of the agreement, which is not uncommon, Tivity were able to work with them to actually buy back what was some legacy hardware that they had for its current balance sheet value, just to really help with that total cost of ownership, given that they had sunk some investment into hardware 3 or 4 years ago, and traditionally they may sweat that infrastructure for a little bit longer before they would look to replace it. And just in terms of the outcomes, and now kind of what Irwell Valley are able to do with connectivity as a service, they don't need to worry about kit refresh cycles again. So as part of the service, Tivity will constantly manage that service to agreed SLAs. That means they don't need to think about either LAN or Wi-Fi kit going out of date, or when they need to budget for particularly upfront cost or capital refresh cycles further down the line. They're able to benefit from a resilient WAN and security solution, all delivered again on a per-user-per-month subscription model. It really helped that they had one supplier. So from, again, all the infrastructure from user to internet, they only had to deal with one organisation, and a lot of this could be managed through the software first of all. But obviously then there is a team of engineering resource sat behind that can help to support them. We talked about the OPEX model being one that allows them to scale up or down, again in line with their potential growth and or decline in certain areas based upon whatever the future may hold from them. Flexible contracts, we just talked about, Tivity software. So essentially what this does for them is, probably removes about 60 to 70% of the day-to-day network management tasks. So, the software is a big part of this and is part of the follow-up that we're happy to do with anyone who is keen to know a little bit more. But obviously the software sitting on top of that network infrastructure is really what gives them the value and the time back to allow IT to focus on the things that matter most to their business. And then we talked about the sale of legacy kit, just help those internal procurement and ROI discussions by actually, getting the balance sheet value of that equipment back as part of the deployment. Just meant that it made the move to CAS and Tivity a little bit easier. And again, just to reinforce the kind of key outcome of all of this, and hence the key theme of today's webinar is by removing the day-to-day arduous network management tasks, they now feel that within the IT function, they have increased capacity to focus on the things that matter most to them and their tenants, knowing that the network is in safe hands through an experienced supplier, but also with some self-serve software that gives them some confidence around management and visibility within that. And then just a little bit about the software. So the kind of key 4 principles and main areas of support within the software overlay around incident management, request management, monitoring, and inventory management. I guess the big one is incident management. So because of the standardization of the deployment across all the infrastructure we talked about, so WAN, LAN, and Wi-Fi, and the software overlay we put on that, the software actually can allow some benefits when it comes to incident management. So, for example, faults are diagnosed automatically, tickets are raised on behalf of the customer automatically, which just means it removes the not necessarily full intervention, but it removes the need to really dive into that in terms of internal perspective, because the faults are identified straight away and we're already working on a fix, rather than you having to ring or perhaps contact multiple suppliers to try and understand what the problems may be. Request management, so all the changes and requests through Tivity are standard drop downs through the software. So this just means that any kind of additional changes are easy to administer internally. There's no free text, raising tickets, sending emails, and things can be requested and then updated automatically in a lot of incidents. Monitoring, so you kind of get a view of the dashboard you can see on the screen. This is at headline level, so you'll be able to see every single device, what it's connected to, what its uptime is, any issues against that device, fixes, SLAs, etc. So there's a whole bunch of areas that can help with around and give you visibility of the end-to-end tech stack. Whereas today it might be that you have some of these capabilities, but you need to dive into multiple platforms, portals, software to get visibility of that. And then inventory management, so every single device is clearly laid exactly where that is on the network, what it's connected to. So I think there is demos we can do of the software, and that would be, as a follow-up, I would suggest anyone that is interested in a little bit more about Tivity and how we can help specifically within social housing, we can set those demos up, no problem. And then just finally on the commercial offering that we talked about. So the price per user model, as I said, is very innovative, akin to a cloud type subscription service, in that you are essentially paying for what you need. So that is perhaps less volatile in its flex than something like cloud or utility, but you've got the ability to scale up and down in line with the organization strategy or things that you need to deal with around an economic and social climate, which really gives you that future-proof nature of your infrastructure, in that you can see and plan way ahead around cost. And that could be as simple as, you've got 100 users on site, the cost of those 100 users. If that needed to scale to 150, you could see a really clear scale path. And similarly, if you needed to downgrade to 50, you could see how your bill could decrease alongside that. So thank you for your time today. I can see that we've had a few questions come through, so I'll just move on to those in a minute. Obviously, we'll work through them, but I think if anyone has anything following these questions that either you need to know a little bit more of, or you're not sure, or if there's if you, as I said, you want to get a demo of the Tivity software, then please just drop me an email, andy.tatlock@tivity.io, and I'd be happy to arrange that for you. So I'm just bear with me, I'm looking at a different screen just for some of the questions. So the first question we've got is, do Tivity take care of the full install process, and what is required from the customer? Okay, so obviously what Tivity are delivering here is an end-to-end solution. So every element of that WAN, LAN and Wi-Fi, along with the software overlapped, is overlaid, sorry, is a Tivity service. So essentially, we would look to work with our customers in a very similar way that you would traditionally see, WAN, LAN, and Wi-Fi deployment. Obviously, if you think about in the current climate, kit lead times, hardware lead times are 4 to 5 months. So that's kind of how you're looking at timescales on from a delivery perspective. But all of this is managed by Tivity, Tivity delivery staff. Obviously, we will work with our suppliers, and we will work with you as part of that project management plan. But we will do the site surveys, everything like that, just to right size is all taken care of. And I think the alternative to this type of solution is, you would need to run WAN procurement, you'd need to run the LAN procurement, Wi-Fi procurement all separately. Obviously, that will mean multiple procurement conversations, multiple commercial considerations. Obviously, the scoping of this is all taken care of by Tivity, and then the delivery is a more joined up one, just because Tivity have visibility of that end-to-end solution. How does this work with remote and home users? So it's a good question. So at the minute, when we look at the price per user and we talk about the infrastructure, what we're looking at is very much office location type deployments, but the software can track remote workers and things like that through some of the firewall features. So if you think about that from a remote working or home working, obviously this is at a price per user, but we work with our customers. We would traditionally typically understand, what is the amount of users that they would typically have on those one site, and then we would just make sure that there is infrastructure right sized for that, 95% of the time, and then obviously you've got an element of scale within that, but all that would come out as part of the scoping conversations. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. Well, I hope that's been really useful, everyone, and thank you for joining today. As I said, my email is andy.tatlock@tivity.io. Sorry, I think there's just one more question come through. Just give me 1 second. I have a client who has a number of fibre and broadband circuits with different contract expiry dates. How would you handle this scenario if they come to Tivity for WAN, LAN, Wi-Fi security? Would you use existing circuits until their expiry dates? About 50% of circuits are contract expired, and the remainder have termination dates between now and mid-2024. I think there's a couple of different ways, and thank you for that question. I think there's a couple of different ways that we could look to handle this. So obviously, when we would deliver, depending upon the size of the solution, we would work with our customers to understand the phase nature of that deployment. So typically, and again, when working within social housing, it's not uncommon for an organisation to have a lot of sites, and therefore it's a relatively large project to deliver. So we could do it in a couple of ways. We are able to deliver these sites in a phased nature that might work out and accommodate any existing contracts, for example. So, if that meant we had to deliver this over a period of 12 months, we could do that, maybe even longer if that was the nature of it, and bring sites live time by time. There are also scenarios where, if, for example, it's the WAN elements, so similar to the question just then, we might be able to deliver the LAN and the Wi-Fi element, and there'll be a pricing model for that. And then when the WAN contract or the existing incumbent WAN contract comes out, we can then just simply upgrade the price per user for that site, and then bring that site onto the WAN contract. There's also other scenarios where we talked about the software. So obviously, as part of this, we're deploying infrastructure and software. There is also the capability for Tivity to deliver this as a software service on top of some existing services. So that could be an option. And then also, we can be quite, we want to work with clients around contracts. If there are buyout or termination or things like that need to be considered as part of the commercial model, you've kind of seen the commercial flexibility that Tivity has above and beyond other vendors. That's a conversation that could quite easily be had as part of that scoping service to really make it a easier and simple transition towards a full connectivity services as a service. Okay, I'm just thinking. No, that's it. Thank you. All right, perfect. Well, as I said, thank you everyone for attending today. As I said, any further questions, please drop me an email. I'm happy to have a quick call. Obviously, the copy of the webinar will be emailed to you. So, as I said, anything else, just feel free to get in touch. Cheers, guys. Thanks.